For decades, historians and the public waited. We waited for a file that promised to unlock secrets, to finally give us answers to questions that have haunted us for generations. And then, one day, it happened. The file was released. A heavy thud on the desk of history, stamped in bold red ink, Declassified. This was supposed to be it, the moment of truth. The world held its breath, ready for the revelations. But as scholars and journalists eagerly flipped through the pages, a chilling realization began to dawn. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. It wasn't just a few black lines, the kind we've all seen before where sensitive names or locations are redacted. This was different. Pages were missing, not just marked out, but completely gone, vanished. As you thumbed through the document, the page numbers would jump, page 78, page 79, and then page 95. Entire sections, chapters of our own history, had been surgically removed. No note, no memo, no explanation was given for the gaps. It was as if they never existed. When reporters pressed for answers, the official response was baffling. They claimed the file was complete. They stood by the release, insisting that this was the full record. But the experts, the people who had dedicated their lives to studying this very topic, they knew better. They immediately and publicly disagreed. This was not a clerical error. It wasn't an accident, some dusty old document falling apart in an archive. Files don't just lose pages naturally, especially not in perfect, sequential blocks. This was a deliberate act. Someone, somewhere, had physically removed them. And more disturbingly, someone in a position of power had to approve it. You have to ask yourself, what was on those pages? The timeline was the biggest clue. The missing pages covered a very specific set of years, not just any years, but the years when some of the most pivotal events of the last century took place. We're talking about undeclared wars, controversial social experiments, and covert operations that were only ever whispered about in the darkest corners of power. It was the most sensitive period imaginable, the exact period where the real, unvarnished truth was supposed to be, and that is precisely where the pages disappeared. What they were hiding might be more important than what they released. The absence of information speaks louder than the words on the page. The real story isn't in the declassified text, it's in the silence of the missing pages. Alright, let's dive into what was actually in that file. It wasn't just some random collection of papers. This was the paper trail for a highly classified program, and I mean top-level stuff. When you look at the approval signatures, they go all the way to the top. This wasn't a rogue operation. It had the stamp of approval from the highest echelons of power. Both military and intelligence agencies were deeply involved. You can see the departmental letterheads and routing slips across agency effort, which is rare and always means something big is happening. The stated goal of the program, at least in the unredacted portions, was vague. It talked about strategic advancement and future capabilities, but the specifics, they were never made public. What we have now are just fragments, puzzle pieces scattered across decades. We've got meeting notes, scribbled and informal, but hinting at huge decisions. There are budget requests that start small and then just balloon, asking for staggering sums of money with very little justification provided. And then there are the memos. Oh, the memos. They are a work of art and censorship. Almost everything is blacked out with thick marker. Entire sections are just solid blocks of black ink. Names of personnel are gone. Locations are completely removed. Even the dates are tampered with, sometimes with the year or month erased, making it incredibly difficult to build a solid timeline. But even with all that censorship, you can't erase everything. Patterns start to emerge when you stare at it long enough. You can see the program grew, and it grew fast. The initial seed funding was modest, but then it just exploded every single fiscal year. The budget request wasn't just renewed, it was increased, sometimes by orders of magnitude. And what about oversight? It was practically non-existent. The few reports that were supposed to go to oversight committees are thin, almost laughably so. They say nothing of substance. It was a blank check. But here's where it gets really interesting. In the earliest drafts of the project proposals, there are clear warnings. Analysts and scientists raised red flags, pointing out potential risks and unforeseen consequences. They urge caution. But as you move forward in the timeline, those warnings just vanish. Later versions of the same documents are sanitized. The cautionary paragraphs are gone. And guess what? That's precisely where you find pages are missing from the file. It's not random. It's surgical. Something changed. A decision was made to ignore the warnings and push forward full steam ahead. And then, it seems something went terribly wrong. The documents don't say what it was, but the tone shifts dramatically. The frantic, expansive energy is replaced by a kind of panicked silence. Communication drops off. The flow of memos and reports just stops. And then, as quietly as it began, the program was terminated. There was no final report, no after-action review, no public announcement, just an abrupt end. All that effort, all that money, all those secrets, and it all just ended in silence. The file doesn't tell us why. It only shows us that it happened, leaving a void where the truth should be. It's a ghost story told through bureaucracy. And the final chapter is one we're still trying to write. Thanks for sticking with me through this deep dive. If you find this as fascinating as I do, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what we uncover next. So what was in those missing pages? It turns out, they cover the most critical period, the shutdown itself, and the chaotic aftermath. Experts we've spoken to are unanimous. They call this a deliberate act, a calculated removal of evidence. The gaps in the record are just too numerous, too convenient. The redactions are too clean, too precise. It's like a surgeon removed the heart of the story, leaving behind a body with no pulse. We tried to get answers from those who were there, the former officials who presided over this entire chapter. But we hit a brick wall, one after another. They refused our interview requests. Some claim they simply don't recall the specific events, a convenient case of collective amnesia. Others gave us a firm no comment, their silence speaking volumes. We were met with slammed doors and disconnected phone lines. But not everyone is staying silent. We've connected with whistleblowers, individuals who were on the inside and are now willing to speak, albeit anonymously for their own safety. They suggest the damage was far more extensive than the public was ever told. They talk about human damage, lives and careers ruined by the decisions made in those closed rooms. They speak of environmental damage, consequences that were known but ignored, hidden from regulatory bodies and the communities affected. And then there's the political damage, a deep and lasting wound to public trust. The missing pages, they believe, would explain why it all went so wrong. These pages aren't just a record, they're the motive. They would explain why the project failed so spectacularly. They would show why the story was buried so deep, pushed into the shadows of history. They would reveal who altered the files, who scrubbed the hard drives, and who gave the orders. The official line might be that this was all done for national security, a necessary evil to protect the country. But the evidence points in a different direction. This wasn't for national security. It was for protection. It was about protecting reputations, shielding powerful figures from the fallout of their own failures. It was about protecting institutions, preserving the pristine image of organizations that had made catastrophic errors in judgment. Above all, it was about protecting themselves from accountability. They were building a fortress of secrecy, and the price of admission was the truth in the end. The truth was the first and most significant casualty. What we're left with is a carefully constructed lie, and our job now is to dismantle it, piece by piece. So, where does it leave us today? After all this time, the official file has finally been made public. It's declassified. You might think that's the end of the story, that we finally have all the answers. But it's not that simple. The file is public, yes, but it's incomplete, and that single fact changes everything. Why does it matter so much? Because our entire understanding of history, of what really happened, is built on records. These documents, these files, are the foundation of our collective memory. When those records are tampered with, when pages are removed or entire sections are blacked out, the history we thought we knew begins to crumble. Trust evaporates. Suddenly, you're not just reading a historical account, you're reading a carefully curated story, a version of events someone wants you to believe. The release of this incomplete file doesn't provide closure. It just creates a whole new set of haunting questions. What information was so dangerous that it had to be removed? What exactly is on those missing pages? And who made that call? Who was the person that ordered the removal? Who were the officials who stood by and approved it? Allowing the sanitized version to become the official record, it's a chain of command, a series of decisions made in the shadows. It's almost certain those missing pages haven't just vanished into thin air. They still exist somewhere. Maybe they're locked away in a secure vault, deep in some government archive, waiting for another 50 years to pass. Or maybe, and this is a chilling thought, they were deliberately destroyed, burned to ash to ensure they would never see the light of day until those pages surface. If they ever do, the story remains fundamentally broken. We only have pieces of the puzzle, and the most crucial parts are missing. The full truth remains hidden, just out of reach. Let's be perfectly clear about one thing. This was not a clerical error. This wasn't some filing mistake or an accidental oversight by a low-level archivist. This was intentional. This was a calculated choice. It was a conscious decision to erase a part of our history, to surgically remove inconvenient facts from the public record. It was an act of rewriting the past to control the present and shape the future. So yes, the file was technically declassified. They followed the letter of the law. But the truth, the real, unvarnished truth was not. It remains classified, buried under layers of secrecy and deception. And that is the very essence of dark American history. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.